Welcome to the FarmBits podcast.
FarmBits is proudly produced by the Nebraska Digital Agriculture team and hosted by students at the University of Nebraska.
The FarmBits podcast comes to you each week to discuss the trends, the realities, and the value of digital agriculture.
Through interviews with experts, producers, and innovators from across the agriculture industry, we hope that you step away from each episode with new practical knowledge of digital agricultural technology.
Hello, FarmBits followers, and welcome to another episode of the FarmBits podcast. I'm José Cesario.
And I'm Natasha Umezu, and we are glad to have you with us as we are joined by the CEO at Nave Analytics, Jessica Korinek.
Through the Nave Analytics, Jessica works with producers to support the implementations and benefits of digital agriculture technologies for irrigation.
With that in mind, let's hear more from Jessi.
All right, Jessi. So thanks for taking the time to be here. It's a pleasure for us to interview you. I think I met you before in one of the conference with Kelsey here. We had a quick interaction, but
Yeah.
Okay. If you don't mind, we're going to start here. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you came to join Nave Analytics?
Yeah. So I actually went to undergrad for human biology. I was going to be an eye doctor for a lot of my life. And I ended up finding my way to agriculture. My husband and I moved out to Western Nebraska in 2012, and I started working at what was then the Monsanto Water Utilization Learning Center, now Bayer Crop Science. Worked at the Agricultural Research Center out there, and really kind of shifted my gears and got into agriculture and agronomy at that point. I had kind of always grown up in an agriculture community, but hadn't been my envision plan to work in agriculture. I went back to school and started working towards my master's in agronomy distance while I was working through UNL. So I worked in industry for about 5 years, and then had the opportunity to work at a startup that was building some technologies around irrigation management. Was working there for a few years before we were actually acquired by the Climate Corporation, so a company owned by then Monsanto. So I found myself back in industry after the startup was acquired, and have been working at the Climate Corporation, doing research and working towards building out an irrigation recommendations type pipeline for the company. So that was what I was doing prior to Nave Analytics, and then about a year ago, my co-founding group and I decided to make the jump and do a startup on our own, and that's when we incorporated Nave Analytics and began building our framework.
This is nice. This is very interesting background. So, and now can you provide us an overview about Nave Analytics? You already mentioned how it started, so can you just give us an overview about the company?
Yeah. So we are a co-founding group of three, myself, Val Kowalski, and Bradley Griggs. And we had all been working together in the past, kind of developing different irrigation management strategies in corporate life, right? And then as big companies do, they kind of shifted direction, and the work that we were doing got deprioritized. And so we still felt like there was a lot of value in what we were doing, and felt like we had kind of learned a lot in the direction that we were studying at that point. And that's where we decided to kick off Nave Analytics and take a little bit of a turn of what we were doing based on the pain points that we were feeling. So every time that we went to explore a different pathway or try to look at something new as far as developing new science, we had to go down this big long path of figuring out how to work with a new data stream. How do we bring it into our system? How do we translate it to make it work with the other data that we were already working with? So there's always this drag as far as like the things that we wanted to do, and then the data work that we needed to do in order to get there. So that is kind of where Nave Analytics was born. So what Nave wants to do is bring all these different data sources together in order to make them usable and available for the companies that are the trusted advisors to the growers. So what we had been developing was grower directed tools. And what we found was that there was oftentimes another person that was involved in making that irrigation decision. And they were the ones that usually had like the platform or the infrastructure that they were looking at to make the decisions with. So that's where with Nave, we're targeting the trusted advisors to the growers to help provide cleaned and usable data streams that they can then incorporate into their user interface and speed up their R&D development and just bring more data into what they have available for helping the growers make irrigation decisions.
That's amazing, Jess. That's really interesting tool that you guys are building there. So since you mentioned that you guys are working with all this data and helping these advisors to work with the platform that you guys are bringing, what are the benefits for each of the customers that this platform can bring?
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned it that we are facilitating them to bring data into the decision. So oftentimes the trusted advisor of the grower is like a crop consultant or a precision agronomist with a retailer or something like that maybe doesn't have a huge budget for R&D and developing their own tools and building it into their own platform. So what we want to be able to do is make that process easier for those advisors. So if it's just a data set that they want to bring into their user interface. So if they want to bring weather information or forecast weather information into what they're already using, we can help facilitate that. Or we also have some value added analytics and things that we are developing as far as like new science, building out a remote sense soil moisture, root zone soil moisture content information. So if that is something that they want to incorporate into the platform that they're already using. So by being kind of a network of customers, we can negotiate with the data providers to get better deals on the cost of data, and then being able to provide tools at a scalable and cost-efficient price that those advisors can incorporate into their current processes.
Nice. And Jessi, the products, they focus in a specific crop or is a general crop, how it works?
Yeah, so we focus on row crop, corn and soybeans first and foremost, as with most tools developed in row crop. But what we want to kind of specialize in is something that is scalable and cost efficient enough to be practical in row crop use. So most technologies that have been developed for irrigation management that kind of track and monitor, water use and things like that are high cost. So something like soil probes and some different modeling programs out there are built more for like specialty crops and things that are higher profit margin, where row crops and their smaller profit margin and larger scale need a different type of technology. And so that's where we are focusing on remote sensed information so that we don't have to have a whole bunch of sensors out in the field to get a good view on what's going on. And then making deals with data providers and having really cost efficient data as well.
Oh, that's really important, how the data can help us to take and making some decisions nowadays, right? And what are the critical problems that you guys see on this data management and how to help the farmers and the crop advisors to make this decision?
Yeah, so critical problems, kind of like I've mentioned previously, is that there's a lot of data out there, just none of it really works well together, right? So being that connection that can bring the data sources together and actually make it usable for an irrigation decision, that's a big obstacle that we want to overcome. The other one is when using data, your data out is only as good as your data in, right? So making sure that the data that we are bringing in is good data sources, and then a lot of the work that we're doing where we're cleaning up the data and calibrating it to each other, making them work together is a big piece. But an obstacle that we are still trying to kind of figure out is around telemetry data, so the actual data that's coming off of the pivot. Each pivot manufacturer has their own system of how they are tracking and reporting that data, and you know they all kind of have their quirks, and then our ability to be able to access that data and read that data is a hurdle that we're going to have to get over.
Yeah, and Jessi, on the top of that, can I ask where does these data are coming from? You mentioned that some of them come from the pivot, right? But how about the weather data? Where do they have some stations close to the farms that will be helping you guys to build a nice model to making decisions?
Yeah, so we want to build a flexible enough platform that we can kind of incorporate whatever data is available. So we use a lot of remote sense data, so a lot of information from satellites. We get weather data from a couple different weather companies. We're kind of trying to evaluate that yet and decide which one we feel is the best data that we want to partner with. And then if the grower has soil probes in the field, if they have weather stations around, being able to bring that into the modeling that is then provided to that grower. So using what's out there for them already. But if they don't have that stuff, we want to be able to have kind of those other sources there that can give good enough information as well. So the modeled weather data, like I said, remote sensed soil moisture content if they don't have soil probes. The only thing that we have to get from a grower would be the information coming off of the pivot. Being able to see how much water that pivot applied to different areas of the field is the only thing that we actually need coming out of the field. The rest is remote sensed or kind of big data information.
Yeah, this is nice. We can see the industry, the company can give a really complete data information for the farmers. This is nice. Yeah. And Jessi, can you tell us if Nave Analytics support any type of fertigation?
So no, we don't do fertigation. And we're really not even doing like recommendations per se. We are providing the data in a way that the advisor can pull it together and make the recommendation. So if they have like a certain equation or a certain way that they like to look at irrigation, we can provide the data that they can then put into their equations or their system to make that recommendation. And as far as fertigation, at this point, we are not in the nitrogen phase. We're just solely looking at crop water use and providing information for efficient crop water use. That being said, there is another great startup in the state. I think a friend of the show, Jackson Stencil, with his company Sentinel Fertigation. They're doing a lot of really great work around fertigation right now.
Yeah, that's right. And how much supervision does it need from the advisor during this process using the platform, for example?
Yeah. So I would say that our program isn't removing supervision per se. What we're hoping to do is provide the data so that the advisors can make really informed decisions easier. So time saved there by not having to manually pull all these different sources together and do their own magic to make their recommendations. We're hopefully making that process more streamlined. And then I would say that it would be the just having more belief in the decision that they're making, right? Making sure, because it's a data informed decision, they're feeling very confident in what they did, and can spend less time worrying and just feel good about the decision that they made.
Nice. And related to Nave Analytics product yet, can you tell us if there is some potentially unexpected benefits or value that the products can, offer for the customers?
Yeah. So this is a really interesting question. I had to go back and kind of think through this a little bit when I was prepping for this. When we started the company, we envisioned just this platform that would be for the trusted advisors, help them make decisions. That was kind of this really easy little bundle, right? And as we've been at different conferences and speaking in different places, we have different people come up to us and say, like, I see value for this in this industry or in this industry. So like we've had conversations around like how our remote sense soil moisture content information could be useful in like the insurance business as far as insuring against drought. Things around like financial modeling and big tech companies that would want soil moisture information again around that drought stress and their modeling for yield expectations and things like that. Things around like sustainability validation. So being able, because we're looking at the whole picture of irrigation, being able to look at how efficient a grower is watering compared to that specific crops in that specific field's water use, and looking at how sustainable that water is being used, and maybe some metrics around that as we continue to have the development around the sustainability market, where carbon is right now. Potentially water is in a similar situation in the next several years, something like that. Even things around like pasture land use and rotation on grazing based on the soil moisture that's out there and things like that. So we've had all sorts of conversations just based on like this initial idea, and then even going beyond irrigation and water use stuff, but the data piece in agriculture as a whole. As well as I do that there's a lot of other decisions that go into producing a crop every year. And so there's a lot of other data sources as well. So if we get really good at managing and handling data around irrigation, then maybe we can move to other areas of the cropping system as well.
It's important because it's not just relating to costs or spend or not, it's related to environment as well, as you said. So
for sure, to
it's
be
really
more
important.
friendly environment, right?
Yeah.
And Jessi, you mentioned about some of the water metrics that you guys have to deal with. So what are the challenges with tracking and reporting these water metrics, for example?
Yeah, so I alluded to it a little bit. With that, we're dependent on the telemetry systems that are on the irrigation systems, right? So if it's AgSense or FieldNet or FieldWise or any of the numerous number of telemetry systems that are out there, they each kind of track and report water use differently. So some of them have pressure sensors that are looking at if there's flow or not, GPS signals as far as where the pivot is at around the field, flow meters that are looking at actual water flow, and all of that is usually a calculation on acres covered. And so it's not oftentimes that it's a straight measurement of how much water was applied to this area field. There's often a calculation in there. And so we are dependent on how good that calculation is, if it has been calibrated. And then, like I said before, our limitation is that's the piece of data that we need to get from the grower. And so it's dependent on those companies either partnering with us and building APIs that we could then pull the data through automatically, or we're dependent on the grower or the advisor inputting that data into our system. So that's our current biggest hang up, and we'll see what develops there, and what kind of solutions we can develop with it.
And on that, in addition, Jessi, is there any minimum requirements that you guys would suggest for some of the growers to have on taking some of these inputs for your system, for example, to helping on the platform to make this data-based analysis?
We have pretty minimal requirements, right? Because we are doing so much from remote sensing, we don't require soil probes in the field. We don't require planting information because we're seeing plant biomass from satellites, things like that. The only requirement that maybe not all growers have would be the telemetry. So just having worked with irrigation management for a long time, if a grower is interested in starting to pay more attention to the water that they're applying to their fields, first step is telemetry. You have to know what's going on in order to get better, right? So whether you have the control of the pivot, you don't need anything more than speed control prescriptions. Like there's big fancy systems that go into remote control or nozzle control, variable rate irrigation, all that good stuff. That's a ways down the path. Like the very first step is get some telemetry on your pivot so you know how much water is going out to different areas of the field. Maybe a start and stop on that pivot just to ease with management on it. That's the very first step. And then you can start digging into how much are we applying at different points in the season? Are we matching that up to the water that crop is using at that point in the season? So that's when the analytics and digging into the data comes, is after you've had the telemetry on and can tell what's going on.
Oh, that's great. And also one more question on that, Jessi.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned about some sensor-based and remote sensing, right? Data that you guys collect. So does the company have any contract with some satellite company that's been helping? And if so, what's the resolution that you guys are getting this imagery?
Yeah, so we do. We work with Planet for imagery, and we use the satellite imagery in a couple different ways. We are looking at biomass information and that goes into the crop modeling. So modeling the crop growth throughout the season, and then being able to look at the specific water use of that crop at different points in the season. So that modeling uses the biomass information. And then for our soil moisture content, we are looking at microwave data from the satellites. So microwave data can look at soil moisture content in the very top soil. And then we are building out science that then extrapolates that through the root zone, and then we're fusing the information from the pivot. So we're taking the topsoil information from the satellite, building out some modeling to look at the root zone of that crop, and then bringing in the pivot information so we can see also, aside from the rainfall, what is being applied through the pivot, and bringing that all together for our soil moisture content. That one is 100-meter resolution. So we have soil moisture content, 100-meter resolution. So that would be like having a soil probe every 100 meters in your field. The biomass one, we're not directly visualizing at this point. If a company is out there and wants an imagery source, we can talk with them and develop that out. So at this point, that one's just going into our modeling. And I think that one is 10-meter resolution.
Nice. So Jessi, talking about irrigation system in agriculture, we would like to know your opinion. If do you have any concern related to this? If something that, something have been doing and maybe you think would be changed, or any concern that you have related to this?
Yeah. So we tend to stay away from like the equipment side of things, right? Like how efficient a system is. What we want to be able to do is work with whatever system is out there and make that system as efficient as possible. Like we're not going to go tell a farmer to put a new $80,000 pivot on his field just so that he can use our technology, right? So there's always concern about efficiency and making sure that that your irrigation systems are inspected annually and the upkeep is done so that you don't have like blown off sprinklers and water running all over and things like that. But that's not really our lane. So I tend to go back to just the data that we can get from that pivot. So if those companies would develop better information around how much water is being applied at different areas of the field, we can get much more precise with the application. Because even if a pivot can be very specific about how much water it's applying to different areas, if that can't be reported back and used into next week's recommendation or whatever the case may be, that the efficiency there isn't really worth it. So I go back to the data in, data out situation where like we have to have good information coming off that field to have a really good idea of what's been applied to that point in the season, how much needs to be applied going forward.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, we go back to the data and the quality of these inputs, right? That's really important to help these farmers to making the decision. So based on that, what's your vision for the future of data benefiting in agriculture, and what other opportunities do you see for this type of work?
Yeah, I think we're so early that we're just like scratching the surface as far as like what we can do with the base system that we're building. I've probably already alluded to most of them. Moving into new crops, so beyond corn and soybeans, getting into cotton, potatoes, wheat, some of those still row crop, but a little bit more specialty than corn and soybeans. We think that we do still have a fit there. And we've done some initial testing in different crops. It would be just kind of building out the modeling that goes along with those crops to be crop specific. Probably also, I've kind of mentioned moving beyond irrigation. So doing some heavy data work in different areas of the cropping system. So whether that's around, nitrogen and nitrogen management and tracking, I don't know, there's a lot of area yet. There's a lot of other decisions to be covered in the cropping system besides irrigation. I think we have potential kind of across the board there.
Nice. Yeah, well, I think with this interview, we could learn a lot about Nave Analytics and have a good view about the products and all the service that you guys can provide for the customers. But if our listeners would like to learn more about, the company or the products, can you share with us some contact or website or any platform that they can reach out to learn more?
Yeah, so we are still a relatively new company. Have been focusing really hard on building our product and are just kind of getting into the getting out into the world part of the business. So we do have a website, albeit not very great at this point, but www.naveanalytics.com is our website. The best way, if you want more information, anything like that, is reaching out to me directly, Jessi, Jessi, at naveanalytics.com will get you to me.
Yeah, no, that's great, Jess. And we will make sure that we have all these contacts on the description of this episode. And
Perfect.
Here for our last question here. What advice do you have for our listeners considering making significant irrigation management decisions?
So it would be take the next step, whatever that step may be. So your next step in making irrigation management decisions may not be getting involved with Nave Analytics. It may be, like I mentioned earlier, getting telemetry on your pivots. So, there's a kind of a learning curve and multiple steps along the process of becoming very data enabled irrigation decision makers. But take the next step, whatever that step might be, whether it is just getting onto telemetry, whether that's getting a trusted advisor that can help scouting and making those decisions across the whole operation, whether that's bringing in more data, whatever that might be, just take the next step.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. It's good that we start to work more with technologies and data that can help us on that for sure.
And thank you for sharing all your knowledge.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jessi.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much to Jessi for taking the time to join this episode of the FarmBits podcast. It's really exciting to hear her perspective and knowledge focused around how to use digital technologies within irrigation management. One of my favorite parts of this episode is how to use the data analysis to help advisors support farmers on irrigation management. It is critical to understand all the collected data for the decision making.
I agree, but my favorite part is when Jessi talks about how the technology can improve water use efficiency and being sustainable. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we look forward to sharing another digital ag story with you next week.
Thank you for taking the time to join us today on the FarmBits podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you're listening to podcasts to be informed about the latest content each week.
We welcome your feedback. So if you have comments or questions for us, please reach out to us over email, on Twitter, or in the review sections of your favorite podcast platform. Our contact information can be found in the show notes.
We would like to thank Nebraska Extension for their support of this podcast and their commitment to provide high-quality informational material to members of the agricultural community in Nebraska and beyond.
The opinions expressed by the hosts and the guests on this podcast are solely their own and do not reflect the views of Nebraska Extension or the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
We look forward to you joining us next week for another episode of the FarmBits.